Hello everybody. How are you guys doing tonight? I guess it's evening for me, right? But for you, it's kind of like noon, something like that,
Yeah, around there.
around there.
Yeah, afternoon for me.
Cool. Well, I mean, first of all, thank you very much for agreeing to do this because I think it's interesting to have this sort of conversation, right, amongst the like handful of FP streamers on Twitch. Again, I didn't actually want to make it specifically on Twitch, but I think the people who like the few folks who also stream on YouTube are stream a lot less often. Like Chris Penner streams, but he streams very very rarely. And then Christoph also streams sometimes, but again very very rarely. So I think even like Sandy's now in chat. I think even Sandy streamed a few times on Twitch, but again not very often. So. Yeah, hello.
Yeah, there's a few other streamers that occasionally pop up on Twitch as well doing functional programming that just aren't very frequent either.
Yeah,
like Christopher Allen or
but
like that.
like he more oftentimes plays games than when he's streaming. But yeah, like he also does some streaming as well. Hello. Okay, so give me 1 second because I need to move all the names because every single name got.
Oh man!
Got moved. No, don't worry. I knew this would happen, so don't worry about that. Let me do that. So actually, while I do that, let's. So what other like? Because we were talking about this. So I think there's one other streamer that does like Haskell once a week. That's what's his name? Soding, right? I think Barry lurks his chat sometimes.
Yeah, I'm pretty much lurking the chat all the time. Although he started streaming a lot earlier these days, so I'm not hanging out in there that often.
Oh, yeah, I think he's on a very 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 weird times. Well, weird. I mean, it's not weird per se, but like compared to most other streamers, he's way earlier than pretty much everyone, right? He's in a time zone where it's very hard to watch from the US, I think. Unfortunately, but it's not hard to watch from over here where I am in Eastern Europe. So I do watch him occasionally, and I think it's interesting even when he doesn't do FP, which is something that's pretty rare because I don't know a lot of. Sorry, I'm not looking at the camera because I'm still fixing the layout, right? So I'm trying to do this as well at the same time. So I'll be looking like more close, like towards the camera in a minute. I think we're almost there. Let me see. Hopefully I did not mix any names.
Yeah, I mean, so like just to continue what you were saying, like his channel is very interesting from like a Twitch standpoint because he has quite a few viewers and consistently has quite a few viewers and still is doing Haskell. So that's pretty interesting that he's able to pull in the kind of viewers that he gets when he's doing functional programming, even and that's a minority of the time that he spends programming, as far as I'm aware.
Yeah, he seems like he's built a community, and then the community watches him regardless of what he does, right? I'm pretty sure he could play games and people would still watch him, even though most of them got there because of programming, right? Yeah, which is interesting, right? Building a community is very important for like when you're streaming, I think. Yeah. Okay, so I mean, let's circle back before we start talking about Twitch too much, and because I always want to do this, and even if this is a slightly different version of Podcast Sundays, right? Because we have multiple guests, I still want to know how people got into FP. I think that's the thing, like one of the most interesting questions to me, because it's such a like it's a pretty rare thing, right? There's very few of us folks who do FP, right? So I think most of these stories are interesting. So I don't know, who wants to go first? Like, how did you get into FP?
I suppose I could start. So I first started when I like honest to God programming in high school with Java, and I thought it was like all that, Oh boy, look at me! I can make computers do stuff. So I went to university at University of British Columbia up here in Vancouver, and their sort of CPSC 110 Introduction to Programming is in Racket, and I absolutely hated it. Like, this is dumb. Where are my for loops? Why am I doing recursion? This is stupid. So I sort of wrote FP off for a couple of years after that. And then I took the programming languages course there, and that is also in Racket. And I think I was a little bit smarter, a little bit less naive at the time, and everything made a lot more sense. Like, oh, this is kind of how I actually write code normally. Just everything's immutable,
Mhm.
instead of mucking around with loops. Oh wow, these combinators that I learned earlier, these are actually kind of useful. So from there, I sort of picked up Haskell, and then it was pretty much game over for me.
Huh, that's interesting because I think who else did that? I think one of my other guests did that because they're kind of like, yeah, I got into Racket or some other programming language, then I learned Haskell and that's it, right? As if it took you like a weekend to learn Haskell, right? Okay, cool. So that's your path. And did you get a Haskell job from the beginning, or did you look for one, or FP jobs, or how did that go for you?
So my first job was I was in university. I was actually writing
Mhm.
Visual Basic .NET. Um, I was the only software engineer on the team, if you could really call me a software engineer at that point. It was a bunch of electrical engineers with me, so that was interesting. Super smart guy. But it was weird being sort of the coding person on the team. My first honest to God job was actually a company up here in Vancouver that used F Sharp.
Okay.
So I did that for about a year, year and a half. And then I moved into my current job where I write Haskell.
Okay, so so you started with Sharp, right? After the Visual Basic .NET thing, right? So
Yes. Yeah.
most of the time you did programming, you did functional programming on some.
Yes. With that one exception, it's pretty much been all FP for work.
Okay, that's interesting. I don't think I know many people like that. You might be the first one I know who did that.
Yeah, I'm super lucky. I am not a typical case. I got very lucky, sort of with who was hiring at the time. So yeah, I'm super grateful for that.
Okay, who wants to go next then?
I can go. I started as actually a Fortran programmer, learning, doing science essentially. So I started programming really during my PhD, and I picked up Fortran because that's what other people were writing in. And I often found myself saying, "Why does this compile?" and "Why does this work?" And that was really frustrating. So I started like moving around other programming languages and discovering different programming languages. So I moved from that to C++ for a little while, and then the sort of template metaprogramming stuff scared me away, and it's just like I don't want to do this either. And then I started picking up Python to do like data science work, and none of those languages felt right. Like they just didn't feel like they were the language for me. And so I started looking into the functional programming through Runar and Paul Chiusano's book.
Okay.
And I found Scala cumbersome, but I found the concepts of functional programming really useful. And like I felt like they were speaking to me in some way. And eventually I found Haskell, and I haven't looked back. So, yeah.
Cool. I find that there's a lot of people who come like from other fields, right? You're doing a PhD, but not a computer science PhD, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I have a former colleague at the previous company I work who has a PhD in physics also. But he was the guy usually in the teams who did the coding, because there's a lot of data and analytical things that they need to do.
Mm-hmm.
And he started loving it, and he also found Haskell being an easy way to express his ideas, right?
Yeah.
Which I think that's a pretty common path for people coming into Haskell, right? Because usually software engineers don't have such a clear idea of what they want to write, correct? Like when they're doing something, but like when you're an expert in a different field, you know exactly what you want to write, right? And having a language that you can write it declaratively helps you a lot, because that's how you usually have your the algorithm and the things you want to write. So I think that's definitely
Yeah, it feels much more natural writing code in Haskell, like writing mathematical code in Haskell, and like the idea of pure functions and programming with pure functions is really, really powerful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, so I guess that leaves you, James. How did you get into FP?
Um, I guess it was a long process. I'm a bit older, been programming for a long time. I was looking back at my blog, and you can probably see the transition there in a post around 2011. Oh, geez, sorry. I'm sitting on my porch. People like really loud cars. So yeah, I have a post on there called Strict Types from 2011, and reading it is kind of embarrassing. The first line, it says, "When I first heard about Haskell, I admit I was quite enamored with the idea of correctness at the time. Apparently, I'd been working with dynamic languages quite a bit, and I was getting a little bit frustrated, I guess, with maintaining larger programs in these languages. So I dusted off my dog-eared copy of the C++ programming language, and I quoted Yarny in it. Like, good design in the absence of errors cannot be guaranteed merely by the presence or absence of specific language features. And, I go on a little bit about it. It's not that interesting of a post, I guess, but it's kind of funny how my opinion has changed. That was kind of an early contact with it around then. I've picked up Haskell a few years ago again, seriously, because a friend of mine at the time who was doing his PhD was building a theorem prover, an interactive theorem prover, and he was building it in Haskell. Okay. And so we would always have lunch together. I was working at a different company and just doing my own thing. And so he was always talking about Haskell, as you do. And I was like, I realized that this person he helped me out with some projects, and he was clearly very smart, knew what he was talking about. And I felt like my opinions weren't really going to hold much weight because I don't really know Haskell all that well. So I decided to learn enough about it to definitively say one way or another. And it completely changed my mind once I got into it and realized that, this is actually how I program for the most part. I've been kind of like a functional programmer, I would say, for many, many years. Even when doing stuff in Python, I stick mainly just plain old data structures and functions and things like that. But Haskell just made stuff nicer and easier, and I kind of fell into the trap. And I've been stuck here ever since.
Okay, cool. So then I think something that I'm interested in, but none of you got into, is how was the learning process for you? Because for me, for example, it took I kind of similar to what you said, James. So I remember being way back in high school, and for me that's probably a lot longer ago than with Reed. So I remember being in high school and looking at a lot of different languages because I was learning C++. I kind of I was decent at C++, right? And I was looking, okay, let's see what other languages are there. I was looking at a lot of different languages. And the one language that's always stood out to me was Haskell, because I saw some examples of, for example, quicksort, right? Which, this looks so pretty, right? Even though it's not necessarily 100% the right thing there. It's just like, okay, it's so concise but so clear at the same time, right? So, and I always wanted to learn it. I tried it a few times with various resources, but I was never able to, either because it was hugs and it was very hard to do anything reasonable with hugs or way back then, or then there were no good resources, at least for me, until the Haskell book came out. So so what about you guys? What was your process? Because for me, I needed for Stack to exist and for the Haskell book to exist, and I needed to buy that and to go through all of those exercises and all the 1,600 page tome that the Haskell book is to finally have the head start I needed to be able to read things on my own and carry on from there. So what was you guys' process?
Mine was very similar. Yeah. You go ahead. Oh, okay, I'll go. Mine was very, very similar. I started with Learn You a Haskell, not with the Haskell book, because it was just free, and I was kind of toying around with the whole idea. That was before I started streaming, actually. So I guess almost 3 years ago at this point, 2.5, something like that. And that book was great until I got towards the end and started getting into some of the more difficult concepts, and that's where I got stuck again. And then I picked up the Haskell Programming from First Principles book, and that's where I started to feel a lot more confident in my ability to do Haskell. And also when I started streaming. And then, I've done almost every book in the Haskell community. I think there's only 3 more that I could do 3 or 4 more that I could work on stream. But do I feel comfortable or confident with my Haskell? I guess yes, but I've never done it professionally, so I don't know if I've learned Haskell, if you will. I can use Haskell, but have I learned it? I'm not sure.
I mean, yeah, I think very few people can say I know Haskell, period, right? So yeah, but okay, cool. So how about you, Reed?
Yeah. So I remember the first Haskell program I ever wrote. I called something main that was not IO. And I spent maybe an hour to 2 hours just bashing my head against, why doesn't this work? Why can't I call this main? This is stupid. But I started with learning a Haskell and sort of just bounced off that. And then I read Stephen Deal's Write You a Haskell, because I was sort of very into writing languages at the time, and sort of just stubbornly forced my way through it. And I kind of came out the other end, sort of understanding the language, and then just sort of proceeded to beat my head against different projects until I sort of understood what was going on. That's kind of always been my learning methodology with languages, is you just try and write a project, go as far as you can until you get stuck, and then go read a bunch of stuff, and then come back, keep going again until you get stuck, and just make as many mistakes as you possibly can in the process.
Okay, cool. I think that's very, like, for me at least, that also worked for me. But for me, if it wasn't for the FP Slack, I'm not sure I would have gotten very far, even with the Haskell book. Because being able to ask a quick question, like exactly the thing that you were saying, okay, you try to write many and you spend 2 hours or an hour, whatever, figuring out what's wrong, right? Whereas somebody in chat can answer that in 5 seconds, and it's not something that you learn maybe a lot from doing, right? And if you're lucky and somebody, like there's somebody who answers the question that doesn't just feed you the answer, but kind of tries to walk you through, okay, let me give you this piece of information, can you work it out from here, right? Rather than here's the complete solution, just paste it in your program, goodbye, right? And I think the FP Slack is very good at that, right? There's very few people who don't do that, and that's absolutely awesome.
Yeah, it is a pretty fantastic resource.
Yeah. We also always tell that to. I always tell everybody that they're trying to get into PureScript, because PureScript has even fewer online resources than Haskell, and only one book or what, right? And like I always tell, okay, make sure you join the Slack, right? Because even the discourse, right? You're not going to make a post for like a 1-line piece of code that's not working, or some people aren't, right? But you can get help within minutes on Slack. So that's always super cool. Okay, so what about you, James? How did you, what was your learning process?
Right. Mine was a little methodical because I wanted to win an argument. And I started with, so way back, I remember learning you a Haskell as well, like way back in 2011 or so. But more recently, when I started to get earnest, I took a course from the University of Edinburgh. They did through Pluralsight, no, something else, FutureLearn.
Okay.
They did like a short little, the University of Glasgow, yeah, where GHC originated. They did a little online course, and so I took an online course there. It was pretty brief. It wasn't very in-depth. I got a little Haskell certificate out of it. But I think I came into it at a fortuitous time because the Haskell book was coming out as well, which is what really helped me dig in. And and I just kind of started writing little projects for myself and not really worrying about the scope of it or like being correct or anything. I just kind of like hacked together stuff. And my go-to when learning a new language is like a small program that I know really well and how to write, like a guessing game.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's mine. So the first thing I do when I encounter a new language is make a guessing game. And so I did that with Haskell. I did a couple little projects where I would, I still get a fair number of paper bills. I have a scanner, so I wrote a little project that would just watch a directory for new photos and then put them into a SQLite database with a couple of tags, and that way I can search for them and I don't have to like manage a file folder thing. And then I just kept going with Haskell from there.
Yeah.
And just growing into bigger and bigger projects.
It does actually sound a lot like what I did, because my first real project, other than exercises from the Haskell book, the first real project was a project for my wife, who's a teacher at the local university. They kind of needed to send grades to students but they couldn't. So before they were just able to post a spreadsheet with all the names and all the the grades, but now due to GDPR they weren't able to anymore. So they had to individually send emails to each student, and then I just wrote her a program where she wrote she gave me a spreadsheet, a CSV spreadsheet with email names and grades, and the program would just automatically send all the mails via some template or something, right? But again, you get to do file libraries for templates and sending emails and so on. I do some IO, figure out maybe IO maybe, all of that fun stuff where you try to massage the types and the monads and functors and so on, which it's...
I found I went back and forth between the two. So I'd read a bit of the book, learn some new things, and go, this sloppy bit of code here could be cleaned up. And so I'd apply the pattern and clean up the code as I went. And that was also a good learning exercise as well, just applying those patterns as soon as I learned them and refactoring code and being able to still keep the program running.
Yeah, cool. Actually, I think my second program was... so I learned Haskell in order to do PureScript. Which because I had a program at the job at the time. I was the team lead for a relatively... well, not that big, a 8-10 person team, and the problem we're having is that our backend code was fine. It was C#, but it was not that complicated. But our front end was super complicated code, and we weren't that good at front end, in all honesty, when we started it, 3 years before the point where I was then, right? And we were constantly getting bugs, creating new bugs in the front end that were... luckily we had a great QA team that was doing manual testing, and they were finding pretty much every bug before production, which was very lucky of us. But I was okay, there's no way that's the best thing we can do as software developer. There has to be something better than this, right? And I found PureScript, but I couldn't find good resources, right? So I just I learned Haskell and then PureScript. But then the second big program I did was literally a halogen application with the whole free interpreter and all of that. That was a huge dive into things, but luckily the PureScript community has been so helpful with that. And we used to have the Slam data main project, the big halogen application used to be open source. So that was great for just looking at it and stealing ideas from there, and okay, that's how you can do things, and that's how you can send data in a F bus or whatever, right? It was a lot of cool things. Okay, cool. So let's see what I guess that gets into FP. So how did you guys get into streaming? Because that's, I think, the other part of... we're not only FPers, we're also streamers, right? So how did you get into it?
Yeah, I mean, my whole thing was just I wanted to have a consistent schedule to learn. I find for anything, guitars behind me or something, if I don't make time to practice, I'm never going to get good. And that was the only way I saw myself getting better at writing functional programs. And it's not so much Haskell as how to design software. That's always been my ultimate goal. It's if I keep this consistent learning schedule, I will learn how to design software, and then I can, be a software developer. That was the idea. And I guess I've been constantly streaming for almost 2 years now. So it's been going well.
Cool. So yeah, because I mean, one of the things that happens when you're streaming is that it's harder to get distracted, right? Because you kind of feel embarrassed to start okay, I need a 5-minute Reddit break that turns into 2 hours, right? You're not going to do that when you're streaming, right? You're going to focus a bit more. So it's kind of keeping you honest, right? And if you say, okay, I'm going to stream for 2 hours doing that, then you're going to probably going to be doing that for 2 hours.
Yeah, and the way that I run my streams, having the book, I'm always working through kind of not always, but most of the time working through a book, and having the chat derail my thought process into other places allows me to learn new things as I'm reading the book. It's not just here's, I don't know, we were talking about quicksort. Here's quicksort, and now I've seen quicksort in Haskell, but then they're oh, well, why don't you try and do insertion sort? And it's okay, well, that might be the next section, but it's sort of chat derailing my thought process and leading me down different paths. And I think doing that on Twitch is a huge help for just comprehension.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. I mean, it's not always that chat is helpful, but sometimes they can, like, sometimes you can get very, very good questions in chat. Sometimes you can just get the random, hey, I have a problem that's totally not related to FP in any way, can you help me? But but a lot of times a lot of times chat can come up with very cool questions. Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. Who wants to go next with how you started streaming? So I'm not sure, but you're pointing outside the screen on my screen.
Yeah, same for me. We must be in different orders.
Yeah, I guess it's it's not. Yeah, we have different orders on each of our computers. So I guess he was pointing to read.
Yeah, I think so. So first of all, to answer Sandy's question, yes, I do. I haven't been super great about it last week because of all this refinery stuff that we've been working on, but I do. So yeah, I started streaming because I felt like there's sort of this gap of resources for people trying to learn category theory. Specifically, there's sort of Bartosz's book, which is great, but it definitely becomes a little bit difficult near the middle once you start to hit like injunctions and things, where it becomes less obviously applicable to programming. And then on the other side, you have like McLean and categories for the working mathematician, just like trying to drink from a fire hose. It's basically impossible to comprehend this stuff without a lot of sitting there and thinking and hard work. And I felt like I personally really enjoy sort of video content where someone kind of walks you through the intuition behind some ideas and kind of, gives you some ideas to think about and sort of ways to play with it in unexpected ways. I felt like there was a big gap specifically for category theory. And also, sort of to tie into that, I think that proof assistants are a really awesome way to sort of learn things, especially math, because it really does keep you honest. You can't just breeze through a section and go, yeah, I get this. You got to tell the computer explicitly, yeah, this works. I checked this out. It's all good. And the feedback is super great because a lot of what you're doing when you're like in university or something, taking a math course, is you're paying a lot of money to get someone to check your proofs. And it turns out we have things that can do this for free, basically. So why not use that? So I have been developing exercise sets to kind of go along with the lectures. I still haven't posted exercises for the second one. I need to do that. But the goal is to sort of run it basically almost like a sort of pseudo course for self-study.
Where is that information?
I think it's on my GitHub, and I have that linked, I believe, in the Twitch VODs. And I also have a YouTube channel that I need to link everything up. I'm a little bit disorganized now, but hopefully that should be getting better in the near future.
That idea sounds exciting, just generally speaking, because I found Bartosz's book just really hard to like gain intuition about category theory from, and like to the point where we stopped doing our book club because of it. So it would be really nice to have other interactive resources to do that stuff.
Yeah, I totally agree. Because I tried to read the Bartosz book a year or two ago. And I was like, yeah, I get this. I totally understand what's going on. And then injunctions came along. I don't understand this. I give up.
Yeah, totally right. But then if you try to look at McLean, then it's also like, okay, I still don't get it, right? It's like all the information's there, but it's so dry that it's very, very hard to get. And my experience with that is even mathematicians think that, because the book is supposedly for people who know math or mathematicians, but my wife is a mathematician and she's having a hard time reading McLean, right? It's not even that. Like, it's a good reference. So once you understand things, you can probably look at it and, okay, I've already understood this before. I just need to remember, to remind myself of the the exact laws, the rules, like the definition or something. But it's not a good source for learning it the first time.
Yeah, the emphasis really is on the working part of the working mathematician.
Yeah.
So hopefully I'm doing a good job. I'd love feedback on that.
So Sandy is saying that he's hoping to bully you, Reed, into giving him a tutorial on, I guess, proof assistance. And then he said maybe we could stream it. I think that's a great idea for a stream.
Yeah,
Actually, that
I would
sounds
totally
super
love that,
interesting.
actually.
I'd watch the hell out of that.
Yeah.
Okay.
My approach to learning Agda was very much like my approach to learning Haskell, in which I'd open it up and sort of bash my head against it until I got sort of an understanding of it. So I'm not exactly the best person to write a tutorial, I think, but I would love to walk someone through it. I think that'd be super valuable.
I mean, writing something is a lot harder than explaining it to somebody live, right? Because like if when you write it, you have to think about all the different kinds of people, different like backgrounds for everybody who might be reading it. Whereas if you're explaining it to like Sandy specifically, you kind of have an idea of what you can grasp and what you can use to explain things, right? You have a reasonable idea of his background and how to explain it.
More broadly, if you're sort of streaming sort of educational content on Twitch, if someone doesn't get it, they can sort of give you instant feedback and be like, this makes no sense.
Yeah.
You're just blabbering on and I'm confused. So being able to sort of loop back and correct those is super helpful.
Yep. So let's circle to James then. How did you start streaming?
I think I downloaded a copy of our OBS. Just went from there. But why did I decide to do that? I think that's the more interesting question, and that came from, I think, October or so last year, or maybe it was in the summer. But Sandy came by and stayed on my couch for a night. And we ended up writing a library together, and we had some interesting conversations late into the evening. And one of them ended up being kind of I appreciated his sort of brash, youthful energy on, what do you say, like, if there isn't enough Haskell in industry, what are you going to do about it? Mm-hmm. Right? Like, be the change you want to be kind of thing. And so I toyed with the idea for several months, and eventually I was just like, well, I'm just going to start streaming it because I kind of want to see just more content out there, more people just coding Haskell and just making it normal and not. I see a lot of misconceptions out there, I guess.
Yeah.
About like what Haskell is from people like myself back in 2011, and I see a lot of those myths pervading to this day. So I just wanted to show people what it's like when I'm programming Haskell, and that I'm not a researcher or an academic or a super advanced galaxy brain programmer. I just hack things together until they work kind of person, and that's how it's always been since time immemorial, let's say.
Cool.
So yeah, that's how I got into it. I just wanted to show people that, like, this is what it's like to work with Haskell. I don't really know exactly what you're doing, but you can figure it out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's. I think that's also very a very useful thing to be doing, because like a lot of people have a very, very distorted idea of how it looks like, or how it feels like, or how like the general way how do you write Haskell, right? Because it's so foreign to so many people, right? And it feels like it's like they can't even begin to imagine, right? So I think it's very, very interesting to have people doing that, right? Just writing Haskell code. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So I don't focus too much on the theory side of things, but I focus more on just I'm trying to focus on like making real practical. Well, I shouldn't say practical, but or not even real, but just programs. I'm just writing programs.
Yeah, that's cool.
People imagine a lot of what you use Haskell for. And so I write programs with it. Not that weird.
Yeah. As far as it goes for me, I used to have, like, my previous job was doing Haskell like full time, and then some PureScript as well, which was super fun. And once I left that job and started a Scala job, I kind of felt the itch to do more Haskell and PureScript and FP in general. Although like we're doing FP Scala, but it's not the same thing. So so I had that. I've been having that itch for quite a while, but then like we had our baby, so it was hard until now. But now, since the baby is like 1 year old, it's not that. It's a lot easier to deal with her now. She has a regular sleeping schedule, so now here I am, right? I finally have the time and the motivation, because I'm very. I feel the itch to do Haskell and PureScript, so I scratch that itchy evenings here from this room. Um, okay, cool. So somebody saying in chat that Agda looks very cool, but I don't have motivation to deep dive into it. Yeah, I mean it's hard because like legit motivations to do Agda professionally are very like unless you're a PhD mathematician doing proofs. There's probably not very many, or maybe like I've been thinking about trying to do some sort of like modeling, some program within Agda to prove some properties for it, things like that. But again, like it's kind of a long shot to be doing some sort of quote unquote formal verification in Agda if you don't already know it, right? Because you have to learn Agda, you have to learn how to model things, and then you have to write some sort of model of your program in Agda, which you won't even be using because you'll be using the different language within it, right? So I guess maybe Reed can go deeper into that, into answering that.
For sure. I think there's sort of two facets to it. Yeah, learning sort of any language or any really new paradigm it's quite an investment. And you're probably not going to be using a theorem prover at work yet, fingers crossed. But the one thing I have noticed, sort of what I've taken away from it in my day job, is you end up writing programs that are easier to verify, if that makes any sense. Like you kind of know in the back of your head, okay, what's easy for a computer to think about, and it turns out that's generally what's easy for a person to think about. So you write the simplest thing possible first. And I think Sandy's a great big proponent of this. I totally agree. Write the dumbest, simplest thing first. And then if that doesn't work for whatever reason, if it's too slow, you sort of iterate and optimize on that. But yeah, learning how to write code that is like extremely easy to reason about and you're forced to reason about is a really super great skill. And proof assistants very much force your hand on that.
Yeah, I think there's a point in most, I don't want to say every, but in most FPers careers where they start looking at provers, and some people stick to them and find them very useful and enlightening, and some people maybe don't appreciate them as much. But I think I think you get some insight into FP, even if you don't end up doing much proving or much theorem proving or math or anything else. It just gives you insight if you're interested in the FP, right, into understanding how things work, and it seems like at least Haskell is moved like slowly nudging towards dependent types, very very slowly, but it's going towards that direction. And like looking at Agda now or Idris or like probably not as much, not Coq as much because it's so different. It's weird. Coq is like it's a theorem prover. It's also based on dependent types, but it doesn't look like it is. Yeah. Like at least Idris and Agda have syntax that's so similar to Haskell that it's like if you know Haskell, you kind of already know them. You can write some simple things already, and simple proofs. Like if you know a bit of logic, like even like classical logic or whatever, right? You can already play with very simple proofs.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, you can also write them in Haskell, but what's the fun in that?
Yeah.
I was thinking about.
Go ahead.
Sorry. Speaking of interactive theorem provers, I wrote a guide on Lean for hackers to use it as a dependently typed programming language just to try it out. But Sandy's new book, Algebra Driven Design, is a good book so far. And I was kind of interested in maybe looking at it as like using something like Lean or Coq, whatever, as a design tool to work through your algebra and have the prover check it for you instead of just doing the squint test and making sure that, I think this is right. Which I think is what the difference between doing maths informally and then doing them formally is just you can't get away with not crossing your eyes and dotting your T's.
I mean, for the algebra-driven design stuff, I cannot emphasize enough the absurd effectiveness of QuickCheck. It is so good. Yeah, we've been working on some sort of code synthesis tools for Haskell, and I cannot tell you the number of bugs that our QuickCheck specifications have found in like the core implementation. So it gets you like 99% of the way there. If you have any really tricky edge cases, I could see whipping out a theorem improver. But yeah, quick check is good,
Oh
folks.
yeah.
Do you mean quick spec or quick check?
Yes, both.
Both. Okay.
We were mainly using quick check because it's like, yeah, we know this thing should be a monad, and we know this thing monad plus, and we also have this other algebraic law that we know we want. So it's not so much discovering the laws we want in this case; we already know them. But I could totally see quick spec being a super valuable tool as well.
The idea was really cool. Can you, so in these other theorem provers, because this is kind of interesting to me, does it help you discover those kinds of laws as well? So like that thing I thought about that I thought was really cool about QuickSpec was like discovering algebraic laws that you didn't once know and then using that to inform your design. Like that idea sounds so cool to me.
You kind of it happens backwards generally. You'll have some property that you sort of want to prove. And in the process of doing so, you'll generally want a bunch of sort of algebraic identities. So you'll go and prove those. You'll succeed, or you'll find, hey, if this fails for some specific edge case, I might want to go back and rework my original design or so on. So it's instead of discovering the laws and sort of building up, you kind of work in the inverse direction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's totally correct. Like you often find sub-proofs, right? And like you figure out, okay, I don't want to do this here. I'll extract that as a different proof, and then you'll find some maybe algebraic properties, as you said. So that tends to happen. Okay, so I guess that's okay. Give me 1 second. So I try and justify the cost of learning dependency type languages with the idea that it will improve my understanding of types in general. Yeah, exactly. I think that's what I was trying to say, but you put that way better than I did, Jonathan. So yeah, definitely, like it will help you understand types a lot better, because like the type system in Haskell is it's a bit weird, right? It's somewhere like it's not. Okay, like it's somewhat clearly defined if you go through like GHC manuals and all of the documents here and there, but it's like it's not very clear cut, right? It's like it's not that simple, right? So you kind of like, but then dependent types are a lot simpler, right? Because Haskell has a lot of like weird edge cases right now, and things like things where like it's kind of I'm not having a very easy time to explain this, but it's kind of like it's complicated, but it's not that it doesn't have that much power, but you could simplify it and get more power if right, with dependent types, and I think that's why people are trying to get that done. Singletons, yeah, no. Matten says singletons for the win. Yeah, no. Definitely no. burn them as soon as we can, as soon as we get dependent types. So Yu-Gi-Oh is asking, what do you all think of Liquid Haskell? Does anyone have experience with that? Because I don't have any first-hand experience with Liquid Haskell.
I explored it a bit on the stream, but I didn't get very far. And then so there was that recent, in the last 2 months, I guess, the blog post about it being much easier to use. But it still doesn't quite play nice with the editor setup that I like. So like I'm very excited for a time where I can just use the Haskell language server and Liquid Haskell together, and they just coexist comfortably and naturally. But it's not quite there yet, so I found it hard to just use on a daily basis.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, so I guess like the integration is not quite there yet, right? That would be one.
It's very close. Like I feel like it's not far from being in just a really, really the perfect ideal scenario. Maybe another year or something.
HLS has really, really gotten good in like the past couple of months.
Yep.
Okay. I wonder if it's like, I wonder what the overlap is between Liquid Haskell and dependent types, right? Like if once we have dependent types, would we need Liquid Haskell as much or no? Or like is there some significant overlap or no?
They're somewhat orthogonal. Liquid Haskell, because it sort of is like refinement types driven by an SMT solver, it's sort of handy in the fact that you can just assert preconditions and you don't have to worry about running proofs. The SMT solver sort of handles it for you. Which is great 99% of the time until you start running into weird edge cases where it's like, this isn't true, and it's kind of hard to figure out why, or like I hit a weird edge case in this exponential climb algorithm, and then it blows up because it is an SMT solver. Is
Yeah, it works great until it stops working, right? In which case it's very hard to fix.
Exactly. But I imagine that most preconditions you have are pretty stupid and pretty easy to check. Unless you're really trying to do some contrived stuff, I'd imagine it worked quite well.
Okay. I wonder how many Haskell extensions are going to become obsolete if you get actual dependent types. Yeah, quite a few, I think, but maybe not that much. Like definitely a few. Okay.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, I mean it's a slow process, but I think we'll get there sometime, right? Whether it's next year or in 5 years, it's hard to tell right now, but I think we'll definitely get there. Okay.